Diversity is advantageous. It creates a healthy competition in pricing. So by adding the river system to the opportunities for product transportation, it created that kind of healthy pricing competition. And so it was advantageous to the producers at the time to have that opportunity to diversify the way that they got product to market.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I'm excited to be back and recording another regular episode of the podcast. And this time, we have not one, but two fantastic guests lined up to share the story of an inland port in rural eastern Washington. Those guests are Kara Riebold, Executive Director for the Port of Whitman County, and Kristine Meyer, Port of Whitman County's Commissioner, representing District 2. As always, I encourage you to give this a full listen and stick around to the end. But without further delay, let's jump right in. First and foremost, thank you so much to Kara and Kristine for making the time to be on the podcast today and to share the Port of Whitman County's story with all of us. I'm just really excited to have this discussion today and really appreciate you both making the time.
Thanks for the invitation. We're glad to be here.
We start off every episode by trying to actually talk about our guests themselves in more detail and really understand your stories. And so I'd love to do the same thing today and just start off with both about more of who you are and what your roles are at the Port of Whitman.
I am a commissioner at the Port of Whitman, and we have three. I'm representing District 2. I was first brought on as a commissioner in 2017, and that was not through election initially, it was through appointment. And so I had to apply and was selected by the other two commissioners to fill a spot. And I have to admit, I don't know that I really knew entirely what was going on and what the role would involve, nor entirely what ports did. But I was excited, I think, initially by the idea that I would be giving back to the community in a really unique way, as I started to understand the role that ports play, different from a county commission, and how narrow the focus can be in that comparison with regard to how we work on infrastructure and economic development. And then as the role grew and my understanding grew, how I could be providing my expertise and perspective to the work that infrastructure and economic development plays specifically in Whitman County, because we are primarily an agricultural based economy, and we are diversifying a little bit with the universities and the kinds of products and industries that come out of research and development there. So that's part of what drew me to the opportunity.
So my background is actually initially in elementary education, and during the summers when I was teaching, I got the opportunity to write grants for the Port of Whitman County, and that was my first introduction to ports entirely. I grew up in a county in Washington State where there weren't any ports, so I didn't have any background at all. And as I learned more about the port, and as I left teaching when my first child was born, the port called and said, "Well, would you continue to do some contract work for us?" And so I did. And then at some point, I was back working full time at the Port of Whitman County, and I've really enjoyed it. Similar to Goldilocks and the Three Bears, I've got a chance to try out a lot of different positions at the port, starting as the broadband director, then becoming the finance director, serving as the chief operating officer, and now in my role as the executive director. And through each of those positions, obviously I've learned a lot more about the Port of Whitman County imports, and I've really come to love all the diverse work that we get to do in the name of economic development.
Well, thank you both for that background, and I think that the enthusiasm that you both express and the stories of learning more about the port and the involvement in the community is probably the perfect way to segue into the next natural question, which is, as far as the port itself goes, I'd love to just know more about the Port of Whitman County and also really the Whitman County community as a whole and sort of the connection between the port and the people of that community.
Sure, Austin. The Port of Whitman, we were founded in 1958, and we are a county-wide port. I think when people usually hear about a port, they think that, well, that's an on-water facility. They think about something very traditional, in the definition of the word port, like a dock, maybe, or something very big, like what they see on the coastline of Seattle. And we do have some of those kinds of facilities, but we are a county-wide port, and we have four maybe lines of or focus areas, maybe that would be helpful in understanding what we do. We develop industrial real estate. We do preserve our multimodal transportation facilities, and we facilitate economic development. And then we also preserve on-water recreation. We have 10 properties that we're managing. Four of those are on water and look like what you'd imagine, and six of them are off water and a little less like what might be imagined. So we have some shipping facilities in Almota and Wilma and Central Ferry, where barges are loaded and unloaded with materials, mostly commodities related to ag production. But we also have a marina and campground facility in Boyer Park. And then we have off-water facilities, industrial parks located in Pullman and Tico. And we have an airport that's located just outside of Colfax. More recently, we have a historic flour mill in Oakdale that we are working on revitalizing with the community. And we have a site that we have purchased recently in St. John that we're going to develop. And then obviously our offices in Colfax. Kara, do you want to talk a little bit more about maybe our connections to the community and how we're doing some of that work with those facilities?
Yes, we recently, in the last 2 years, were named the Associate Development Organization, the ADO, for Whitman County. ADOs, every county has an ADO, and the ADO partners with Commerce to meet economic development goals. And in that role, we hold regular meetings that with elected officials from each of the communities that come together every other month for about an hour and a half and talk about projects we're doing, what's needed in our community. And that's also an opportunity for us to tell them more about our port sites and learn about what their needs are within the community, which guides our project development as well as our property development.
Well, I think that's where some of those properties that some people might not necessarily know yet about, those projects were born of those conversations and relationships with our communities. I don't think we would have known ourselves that there was a need to develop and revitalize the historic Oakdale Mill, but for our connection to community. So those conversations really are the impetus for the things that we're working on, whether those are on water or off water. And it's the impetus for our diversity in project.
Yes. And when we think about our on-water sites, it's a little bit unique because all three of our on-water port sites are a significant distance from any of the incorporated communities in Whitman County. So the Port of Wilma actually sits, because the Snake River is the southernmost border of Whitman County, the Port of Wilma is actually closest to Clarkston, Washington, in Asotin County, It's just across the river from it, compared to how far you have to drive, at least 30 miles to get to the nearest Whitman County community. And when we think of Almota, that's over 16 miles from Colfax, Washington. And Central Ferry is the most rural of all of our sites, and it's 35 miles from Colfax, Washington. So, because each of those port sites have a different name, we have to really work. And they don't say Port of Whitman County, they're Port of Central Ferry, Port of Almota, Port of Wilma. We really work to educate the Whitman County constituents that these are all part of the Port of Whitman County and the benefits that they bring to our county, because most people don't drive by those sites very often.
And I think that's maybe speaks to something that, I noticed as well when doing research for this podcast, which is, when I look at a map, Whitman County it's an inland northwest port, but it is also sort of geographically, uh, you know, maybe not disconnected from the river system and the Snake River in particular, but it is, it's a bit more remote, kind of getting out to where the actual river is. And so I am curious if you could speak more maybe to just how valuable the river system in particular is to the port given your geographic location.
Sure, I can start there, and Kara can build onto it a little bit. But I think one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that while we are perhaps geographically disconnected, we are economically connected, to the river system. And when the port was established in 1958 as a entity, it was specifically for the purpose of taking advantage of the coming slackwater navigation that was made possible by the building of dams. Those first three properties that they built those facilities on, Wilma, Almota, and Central Ferry, were intended to utilize the river system for grain transport. At the time, they were very reliant on rail transport or road transport to get those products to and from market. Um, and when you're talking about an economy, that diversity is advantageous. It creates a healthy competition in pricing, and those kinds of things. And so by adding the river system to the opportunities for product transportation, it created that kind of healthy pricing competition. And so it was advantageous to the producers at the time to have that opportunity to diversify the way that they got product to market. And so since then, with the building of dams and more terminals on the river, the Port of Whitman isn't the only one that's taking advantage of this kind of opportunity and diversification. But that's where we started. And it's become something that we are very much reliant on, in terms of our ag economy, just as one facet of how the river system serves us.
The river system, another facet is Boyer Park and Marina and our mission to provide on-water recreational opportunities. So below Lower Granite Dam sits this 56-acre park that includes a public day use beach, RV sites, tent sites, motels, 4 cabins, and the park draws over 500,000 visitors during its season, starting in April, going through October, down to the river to enjoy the benefits of this body of water that we have.
Well, I can tell you one of the first jobs I had, was driving truck for my dad, and there was no air conditioner in that. And after you got off work, being able to jump in the river at Boyer was a welcome evening opportunity. So I've been taking advantage of both sides of what the Port of Whitman is doing for a long time. We'll just say a long time and leave it at that.
Boyer Park and Marina is a great place for folks to also really experience the multimodal transportation that our county benefits from, because you can be down there and see a barge go by, and on the other side of the park, a train might be going by at the same time. And of course, to get up or down the hill, you see those trucks that Commissioner Meyer's talking about, bringing grain down to the river. So it's a real great representation of the port's mission and the importance of the river system to our economy.
Well, and now you can see some of those vacationing folks on the river as well, with cruises and other kinds of boats on the river now too.
Yeah, no, it sounds, I mean, frankly, it sounds like I need to plan myself a trip and get out there, which I think we actually might be working on, although it would probably be more work related than recreationally related.
Well,
But
if you can tuck your fishing pole in, you might get something out of it that way too.
you're speaking my language now. Well, I think one thing that really stood out to me there, among many things, is you did mention that there are these multi methods of transportation. You have the rail, you have the barge, you have the semi trucks, and I think it's worth pointing out that oftentimes we get into this comparison, I suppose you'd say, between methods of transportation and the differences between barging, rail, and truck. But oftentimes when we're talking about the work of the various inland ports, one of the really important values is that there are multiple methods of transportation rather than, a heavy reliance on just one, and that it's important to have that balance. And it sounds like in this case, from my understanding, you have obviously all three, and then you also mentioned even something about an airport. So it really sounds like,
Mhm.
as far as taking advantage of that, there's a lot of sort of multiple ways of transportation all simultaneously happening at once through the port.
Yes, we do. I think that it's important for people to understand that the port system in Washington state does have that at its core, that it is always been um, from its legislation uh, designed to encourage multimodal transportation, that we couldn't possibly in any one port have just one or even two and still expect the kinds of products, industries, jobs, and ways of life to flourish without that diversity. Nor could, I think, the tax base support the kinds of volume or maintenance that would be required if you were reliant on only one or two. It really is a all all on the table strategy that helps us to be successful.
No, that absolutely makes sense. And another thing here, obviously, we're talking a lot about is the recreational benefits that are being provided through the port. And I think that that's maybe something that a lot of people don't know about the ports. And, I'll even admit that as I've become more familiar with the work that you and others in the region are doing, it's one of the many curiosities that I have is learning about just how much ports are doing for communities and for providing these other benefits such as recreation. And you've mentioned it's also part of your mission. It's a goal of yours. I guess maybe I'm just curious if you could speak a little bit more to why the ports in particular have taken on that role and that responsibility in the community.
Sure. I think some people might recognize this as a marketing phrase from communities nearby, but I think it speaks to the region to be branded near nature, near perfect. Acknowledging that uh, the way of life that we enjoy here in the Northwest is very much connected to outdoors and recreation, that preserving that way of life, celebrating that, and creating opportunities for people to have a balance in the way that they live. You can go to an office or not really all day, but also be able to um, go out and explore on the river, um, in parks and recreational facilities, trails, and those kinds of things that surround these facilities, and connect our ports and industrial facilities to the places where we also live. It's really important that we're doing both of those things in balance, that creating a way of life is part of what we're doing as well. So that's why hydro facilities, port facilities, um, and and our communities are connected to our natural environment, that it is not one to the expense of the other, that it is one in concert with the other. And so that's part of our line of business at Boyer, but it's something that I think you'll see is a through line to many of the port operations throughout the state.
That makes perfect sense. And you also touched on a little bit the hydro facilities. And of
Mhm.
course, we find ourselves on a podcast named Dam. So I suppose it's only right that I ask, how valuable is the hydropower system on the lower Snake River to the Port of Whitman County?
Obviously, in order to have industrial properties and to recruit businesses to those properties, we need to have reliable, affordable energy. And the hydro system on our Snake River system provides that. It's critical even in our off-water locations. One of the first things that companies ask about is their power needs and their water needs. And so having reliable hydropower is really beneficial to our area.
As far also as the types of industries that you find within ports, what kind of different folks, you have, I guess, tenants, other people that are coming in and out in some of those, different industrial sites and things. Who do you find is kind of occupying those spaces and aligning themselves with the port?
So our tenants in the industrial sites, obviously there's the egg focused businesses that are shipping grains and also providing egg inputs, so fertilizer and other chemicals. When we look at the Port of Wilma, which is our largest on-water site at uh, around 300 industrially zoned developed acres. We also have a lumber mill there, and we have a paper, Clearwater paper there, as well as a propane company that's using the rail to ship in and out. And then we have, some pockets of tenants that are have located at this site, like Leading Edge Aviation, which is a helicopter company, because the site really allows them to keep all of their equipment there and take off and land safely. So we have a variety of tenants across those sites. But I think what drives all of them there is the opportunity for the majority of them to have that multimodal transportation. They needed the rail or they needed the water, or in the case of several of our tenants, they needed both. They've needed both options to be able to get the commodities that they work with in and out of the port site.
And I think with regard to our off-water facilities, what's been attractive to folks is access to workforce. Our being contiguous to a couple major higher ed institutions in Washington and Idaho has made our industrial parks very attractive for research and development companies, manufacturing companies, those kinds of businesses that are very reliant on a highly educated workforce. And so that's where those particular sites have been a draw for those kinds of businesses.
That brings up something too that candidly has just been kind of on my mind throughout this conversation so far, which is that if I was to sort of think of how to frame Whitman County, I would describe it as probably being more of a rural leaning county. And what I keep hearing in all of these different examples and stories about the port is just the amount of economic opportunity that's being created by the work that you all are doing. And I imagine that that has a really incredible value to the community as far as giving people a lot of different options for different types of jobs and occupations that they can take on to ensure that they can, remain in that county and enjoy the way of life there.
That's true, Austin. There, as part of our focus on creating economic development, we do try to measure what what matters. And so every 2 to 3 years, we have a regional economist from the University of Idaho perform an analysis of the port's economic impacts on Whitman County. And as the lead economic development entity within the county, 23% of the jobs in Whitman County are uh, attributed to the port's efforts. There's 5,892 jobs annually that average salaries and benefits of over $77,000 that are attributed to the port's work. And we try to collect this data and measure it regularly, especially when we bring new sites online, to make sure that we are communicating that value back to the community too, because many of the properties were developed over 40 years ago. Sometimes it's like, uh, sometimes it seems like the community might have forgotten what what wasn't there before, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's hard to remember sometimes that 40 years ago, many of our properties were undeveloped and not necessarily even directly contiguous to the incorporated parts of the town. They were located several miles away from what was considered the boundary of town at that time. And so um, it's easy to forget how sometimes a project is a catalyst for what has happened since maybe um, you some of us weren't even born when some of these things were just an idea. But the port was at the infancy of many of these things. We stand on the shoulders of giants.
Well, it's as you're saying that, one of the things that comes to mind is just how often when I've been able to get out to the various communities out there and particularly, going to different events where, we get to connect with the public and have those conversations. I always enjoy the people that come up and say, I remember, for example, when those dams were built or,
Hmm.
they'll say my father or my grandfather, or whoever, helped in the construction of those, or, they remember their family's connection to it in some way, shape, or form. And I think those stories are so fun and such a good reminder of, um, putting all this into context as far as the scale of which things have been developed and how far things have really come. And I guess, I'll use that as maybe a jumping off point to talk about those opportunities to connect with the community one-on-one, because I know you all have a big event coming up here soon, and we're particularly excited about it. So maybe could you tell us a little bit more about the Snake River Family Festival?
Oh, the Family Festival, yes. So it's coming up on June 14th, and it runs during the heart of the day from 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. So you can sleep in that day actually if you want to and still make it. You won't miss anything. Everything is free that day. It's at Boyer Park, and so we're offering lunch and ice cream and lots of fun activities while supplies last. So don't sleep in too late. You could miss huckleberry ice cream, but we'd still have some of the chocolate for you. Sammy Eubanks and his band will be playing music in the shelter there. We'll also have some tours of the Lower Granite Dam. And it's an event that's really focused on educating the county and surrounding communities on the importance of the dams. Exhibitors are coming from across the region to teach families and kids about the Columbia Snake River system. But it really is fun. It's not a class, it's really super fun. You can do lots of activities at booths and things like that. And it's a little early in June, but I bet you'll still see some folks bringing a swimming suit and maybe enjoying some of the water down there. And there are lots of people that make a weekend of it. And the camp facilities are also open. People kayak and bring boats down and that sort of thing as well. So it's a great weekend to be down there on the water at Boyer. But our events are from, again, 11 a.m. until 2 p.m. on Saturday, June 14th at Boyer Park and Marina.
Well, I can speak firsthand that we are really excited to be a part of it, and I believe this will be Northwest River Partners' first time attending. So yeah, we're really excited to come check it out, and I think that the if nothing else, the offer of Huckleberry ice cream makes it all worth it. So uh,
Yep.
we
Yep.
should
It comes from Ferdinand, so it's very popular.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, in that case. Now we're really talking. So, yeah, we're super excited about that and can't wait to be part of that event. And other things to be excited about, I suppose. Are there any projects going on at the port that you all are excited about? Is there anything in either that's recently been done or maybe is sort of in the works that gets you particularly worked up and excited to share some new successes with the community?
Well, I think I don't, for me, it's a tie probably between the work that we're doing in Oaksdale on the historic mill, or maybe some of those last mile broadband projects that we're working on. I don't know, Kara, what's got you getting up excited in the morning?
Well, we were very excited to add a new tenant at the Port of Central Ferry,
Oh, that's
and
right.
that was a result of funding that we received from the Department of Commerce to extend our rail to a property and then install a well. And so we have a new fertilizer company at that site, which means all of our on-water port sites are completely leased out. And then when I think of our uh, inland sites, it's pretty exciting. We have a brownfields grant that has allowed us to look at properties throughout the county that are underdeveloped either because of real or perceived um, brownfield contamination. And one of those sites is in St. John, Washington, and we're excited. We received notice actually just today that are going to get $500,000 in funding from the EPA to do the cleanup necessary at that site so the hospital district could build a new clinic there. And so that project has kind of got us working again throughout the county and really in close contact with the communities throughout the county. So I'm excited about that too.
I suppose the timing then of the podcast is a good one since we get to share that news that came in today. Yeah, that's really fantastic. Really looking forward to hearing more about that and seeing what comes from it. Um, when we talk about all this stuff, there's so much enthusiasm and excitement for what's going on, and there's obviously so many great stories to tell. But when we are trying to share this with the outside world, what are some things that you do feel like maybe the public and the policymakers should know about the work that you're doing as a port, but they might not be aware of?
That's a great question. When I think about the public, one thing that we hear consistently is I didn't know there was a port in Whitman County, and I think that comes from people. Some people think port and they think of the ocean, and they forget that there are lots of different kinds of ports, and that uh, there are many ports that ship on the river system. And while we don't physically, the port itself, ship the grain down the river, we have many tenants that are doing that. So we manage the properties where the shipping of products happen. Those are our on-water properties, and I think that's something that's kind of eye-opening to the public in general when we talk about our port site. And the port's facilitating economic development, whether it's on water or off water. We work to strengthen Whitman County's economy. And that includes the advocacy that we do for hydropower. So when I think about what policymakers should know, we hear a lot about the financial and the energy impacts of the dams, but there's not a lot of discussion about the tourism and recreation impacts of the dams. And we've talked about how the port operates Boyer Park Marina just below Lower Granite Dam. It's the only marina in Whitman County, and we lease the property from the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a public park. It's beautiful, and it draws 500,000 visitors a year. That's over 10 times the population of Whitman County. So this is a big tourism driver for our county, the recreation that the Snake River provides.
Well, I really, really appreciate that perspective. And when we're talking about all of these things, I imagine some people, they might feel inspired. They might want to know what they can do to get involved. So I'd love to hear if there are ways that the community can get involved, if there's ways that they can connect with you, or, I guess maybe if they're not part of Whitman County, are there ways they can connect with whoever their local port might be, and support the work that you all are doing?
Well, I think it's been said by a number of your guests before, but beginning by caring and learning more, I think is probably the first step to any of this work and connecting with whether it's your ports, your local electeds, the nonprofits that are working in this space, like yourself and others, and engaging in a way that's productive and thoughtful to that work is really important. That the more people are at the table, the more voices that are here, the diversity of thought and opinion makes those decisions stronger, I think. And so I'd encourage anyone to engage, whether it's attending a local port commission meeting. You know, we've got room in the room all the time. There's always folding chairs that we can bring out and get more people engaged and listening. Or joining by Zoom or whatever, we'd encourage people to connect with us and participate. Kara, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think that's a great answer. Engagement is with the public is sometimes hard to do. It seems like it's easier for people to engage when they don't like what's going on. And if they could engage earlier, they could help guide us towards the projects that they are most interested in. And it makes for a more efficient process for all of us. So early engagement often, and if you can't attend the meetings, reaching out to your elected officials and just letting them know what you like and what you'd like to see more of.
Well, is there anything else that's next on the horizon for the Portland Whitney County that you want to share? I guess is there anything else that we really haven't covered today that you'd like to make sure we get the word out on?
Well, I think that our PR gal would hate it if we left without saying, please follow us on social media. The Port of Whitman is available to you on Instagram, Facebook, X, and LinkedIn. Come to our meetings. We also have those available virtually or in person.
Well, I think that's a great shout out, and yeah, we'll absolutely make sure to drive folks in that direction, and we hope they give you all a follow. Um, And I think that probably brings us down to the winding down of this episode. And so again, want to thank you both for making the time. And we do have one last question. It's our little secret bonus question that I always get in at the end of every podcast. And I know some guests appreciate being put on the spot, and some don't. But I think it does lead to a more genuine response. So. With that, I guess I'll throw the question to both of you, and leave it up to you how who wants to answer first. But the thing I like to do is bring it back to our guests really and help our audience understand what motivates and inspires our guests, what makes them who they are and drives them to do the good work that they're doing for their communities. And the way I do that is to ask everyone to share some advice with our audience. So, it can be a thing that you've always lived by. It can be a thing that's inspired you recently, but um, we'd love to hear what drives you, what inspires you, and what advice you would give to our audience if you just had to give someone some real general life advice. So I suppose with that, I'll turn it over to you both and see who wants to go first.
Well, I think what drives me and inspires me is the opportunity to help other people. And I think the port's role is the perfect example of that, helping businesses find locations within the county to grow and flourish, helping fund important projects, helping our community partners realize the projects that are important to them and what they want to do. And so we have a great role here where we get to advocate and assist others every day. As far as advice, I think, it's good to start every day by drinking a glass of water. It's good for your body, obviously, and I think it kind of ties back to the port. Water is also the lifeblood of our port here, so I start every day with a glass of water.
I think to tag on to what Kara was saying about helping others, I would advise kindness. You can help people just by inspiring kindness. Do the next right thing. Be kind to one another. Um, and I think there's a shortage of that in the world sometimes. It's really easy to point out what's wrong in the world, but instead to resist that and be kind to one another. It will help us do the next right thing.
Well, all I can do is really just say, amen to both of those points, and I would also add that it might just be because we've been doing the podcast and I've been talking a lot, but I think subconsciously got a little thirstier after after hearing Kara's advice there. So, yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time for sharing the story of the Port of Whitman County and I think that there's so much good information and conversation that's been had here, and I really hope everyone appreciates getting to hear that story and also takes up some of these opportunities to get more involved, whether that's going out to the Snake River Family Festival or going to those commission meetings or just finding other ways, maybe again going out and recreating at one of the sites that we mentioned today. So thank you to you both for making the time and excited to continue to share your story and continue the great partnership that we have with the Port of Whitman County.
Thanks, Austin. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to share this story and for bringing us so many other great stories about the river system. We appreciate it.
I start to feel like a broken record saying this with my outro, but I had an uphill battle putting this podcast together due to tech issues on my part. And that included the recording portion of this. So I have to give extra appreciation to today's guests for hanging in there with me while I sorted that out. Now, luckily for you, the listener, those challenges didn't impact the quality of the podcast you just heard. The enthusiasm in today's conversation really stuck with me, though, and hopefully it did with you too. And we really do hope you'll come hang out at the Snake River Family Festival with the Port, Northwest River Partners, and many more. In case you also forgot by now, let me remind you that there's huckleberry ice cream on the table here, okay? As I always say in the wrap up of the podcast, I strongly encourage you to reach out with suggestions for topics, guests, and anything else you have on the noggin. The first way to do so is to use our contact form on nwriverpartners.org or send an email directly to info@nwriverpartners.org. We'd also love to gain your support through positive reviews, which help DAM grow, as does subscribing and turning on notifications for new episodes. While you're at it, make sure to share the show with everyone you know. And check us out on social media at NW River Partners on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. Until next time, either by audio or in person, see ya.